November 2004. The southwestern coast of the United States. The radars of the American cruiser Princeton detect a strange signal. Something at an enormous altitude, twice that of a standard civilian aircraft. According to the radar data, the object is not any known aircraft. From the nearby carrier Nimitz, 2 fighters are dispatched for investigation. Each fighter is manned by a pair of pilots. It is a clear day, with blue skies and good visibility. Approaching the location indicated by the radars, Commander David Fravor notices a turbulent patch on the calm ocean surface, about the size of a large passenger airplane, and something strange above the water. This object is not only seen by Fravor but also by the other 3 pilots. One of the planes descends to get a closer look. The pilot then observes something peculiar. The unidentified object's size is approximately the same as the pilot's fighter. But what is truly strange is the complete absence of the usual aircraft features. No hints of wings, propellers or engines, a sleek, white, elongated object. Fravor moves even closer to it, and then, in literally an instant, the giant object slips away at tremendous speed. No trace remains, as if it was never there. The pilots return to the carrier. Afterward, another crew takes to the air. On board is an infrared camera. With it, the pilot manages to capture the unidentified object. The video, lasting 1 minute 16 seconds, will become known as FLIR 1, named after the infrared camera. The device briefly catches the object, after which it rapidly flies away. The so-called Tic-Tac incident will perhaps become the most famous UFO case of the 21st century, largely because it will be confirmed by numerous witnesses, equipment, and even official authorities. Of course, this is but one of countless unidentified flying object videos. There are hundreds or even thousands on the internet. Most are of no interest. But then there are the others. There are a number of cases we cannot explain, their characteristics are unknown to us, and they have no explanations. This is precisely what the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence of the United States said during a congressional hearing on unidentified flying objects a few years ago. So you understand the level of discussion on the topic. It's one thing when people in tinfoil hats start talking about little green men. It's quite another when a high-ranking military official in the United States acknowledges, yes, there are cases, and we do not know what they are. Strange objects in the sky have interested humanity for centuries. Before video recordings, there were photographs of UFOs, before photographs, paintings, and eyewitness accounts, and yet this topic has always been somewhat taboo. On one hand, those who seriously discussed flying saucers were openly ridiculed by society. On the other hand, the authorities have remained silent and hidden information about UFOs for decades, as indicated by declassified documents. However, a vast number of people around the world have seen strange objects not in photographs or videos on the internet, but have witnessed them with their own eyes. I'm sure there are such among you. Well, let's delve into this controversial and ambiguous topic. In this video, you're in for the full history of the most mysterious phenomenon. What lies behind the strange objects in the sky in various parts of the planet? Who leaves mysterious marks in the fields? Who abducts people and animals? Why do authorities conceal information about these events? And finally, are we alone in the universe? As you have already guessed, in the matter of UFOs, one of humanity's main problems has always been communication. We will be convinced of this more than once. Sometimes specialists within a single country could not effectively share information with each other. And based on this, in the coming decades, we are likely to make significant advancements in the study of unidentified flying objects. Okay, let's immediately answer the 2 main questions that interest everyone. Do UFOs exist? Absolutely. Yes. The fact is that the abbreviation UFO historically became synonymous with flying saucers, little green men, and the like. However, UFO literally means what the abbreviation stands for. Unidentified flying object, something flying that could not be identified. Maybe it will be identified later, or maybe never due to the lack of data from witnesses or equipment. The second main question: do civilizations and intelligent beings exist beyond Earth? With very high probability, yes. And this isn't me speaking, it's mathematics. It is clearly on the side of aliens. Let's count together. 8 planets revolve around a star named the Sun. Along with them are several hundred satellites, comets, asteroids, and all this we call the solar system. The solar system is merely a tiny part of the vast galaxy named the Milky Way. According to astronomers' calculations, in this galaxy alone, there are between 100 and 400 billion stars. The Milky Way and several other galaxies constitute a small portion of a vast structure called a supercluster. In this supercluster are several 100,000 other galaxies. This supercluster is part of an even larger complex consisting of approximately 60 superclusters. In short, the universe is so huge that potentially the number of planets on which there could be life and intelligent beings equals this number multiplied by 1,000. Of course, the calculations are theoretical, but it's unlikely that after this anyone will think that Earthlings are so unique as to be the only living beings out of 1,000 trillion potential options. From the questions of whether there are UFOs and whether there are aliens arises a third, which we will mainly be answering today. Could extraterrestrial civilizations be responsible for at least a small part of the numerous UFO incidents on our planet? And what was the cause of the other incidents? Before we start, it's important to discuss a couple more points. The theme of UFOs and aliens carries a certain religiosity, in the sense that for many it is a matter of faith. People generally fall into 2 camps. Some are unequivocally convinced that extraterrestrial civilizations, or at the very least secret technologies, are behind these incidents. Others are prepared to seek any understandable and primitive explanations, even for events that transcend the bounds of human knowledge and the laws of physics. In this video, I will not be an advocate for either side. I will rely on data. What we know and can explain and what we do not know and cannot explain. Then we will consider existing versions. Most of the reviewed cases are related to the United States of America. There are several reasons for this, and one of them is the following. And we saw bright lights, they were visible for some time, and then they flew away. These words are interesting not so much for their meaning, but for who said them. It was the President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. UFOs in the United States were discussed by presidents, high-ranking officials, scientists, military personnel, and a huge number of ordinary people who were witnesses of the phenomena or simply interested in the topic. Because of this, we have a huge amount of data specifically from the USA. By data, I mean eyewitness accounts, documents, photos, videos, newspaper archives, TV programs, and other sources of information. Only based on a large amount of data can balanced conclusions be drawn. This does not mean that UFO cases did not occur outside the USA. They did, and we will talk about some of them, but most of the video will concern the USA. However, all conclusions can be safely extrapolated to other countries. The number of articles and video materials about UFO incidents is enormous. The number of articles and materials debunking these incidents is slightly less, but also significant. However, considering each individual case in isolation from the context of history is not entirely correct. After all, it turns out that answers to many questions, even about modern UFO incidents, can be found in the past. That is where we shall go. In July of the year 1947, Colonel William Blanchard was looking at the debris of a mysterious object. Pieces of wood, rubber strips, scraps of reflective material with strange symbols resembling hieroglyphs. Several days before, a local farmer had discovered the find. It happened near a village, approximately 100 kilometers from Roswell Army Airfield. On the advice of a local policeman, the farmer reported the information to the military, and they collected the debris. Colonel Blanchard was the commander of the airbase and an experienced pilot. He understood that the debris did not belong to any known aircraft. The officer almost certainly knew what debris lay before him. This was the thing that half the country was talking about. In a press release issued by Blanchard's order, it was stated that the military had captured the first flying saucer. The reason why Colonel Blanchard so confidently announced the discovery of a flying saucer was as follows. Merely 2 weeks prior to this, an event occurred that is widely considered the inception of the modern era of UFOs. It was then that businessman Kenneth Albert Arnold, piloting a small private aircraft, observed a bright light and 9 convex objects in the sky. This took place near Mount Rainier in the western United States. By Arnold's estimation, the objects were moving faster than the speed of sound. A member of the Air Force dispatched to interview Arnold concluded that he most likely did see what he claimed. Supporting Arnold's credibility was the fact that he was an experienced pilot, having amassed considerable flying hours during World War II. This story would be an ideal subject for mythbusters. Today, theories range from reflections of his aircraft's own instruments to missile tests conducted in relative proximity. However, too much time has passed, and we are unlikely ever to learn the truth of what Arnold saw, or if he indeed saw anything at all. In the year 1947, down-to-earth explanations scarcely interested anyone. Arnold's case spread rapidly across the country in a matter of days. In his interviews, Arnold described the movement of unidentified objects as like the motion of a saucer skipping over water. In journalistic interpretations in several newspapers, this was rendered more succinctly as flying saucers. Thus, in essence, a misunderstanding gave birth to the most famous form of alien spacecraft, triggering a genuine flying saucer epidemic. Reports of new flying saucers began to come in torrents. Newspapers across various parts of the United States reported almost daily on new instances of strange objects in the sky. Most referred to them with a single phrase, flying saucers. 4 days later, a Navy pilot spotted 6 circular flying objects in the skies over Nevada. On that same day, an Air Force officer reported an unusual flying object soaring over his head and ascending into the sky at a 90-degree angle, this time over Alabama. A few days later, several military and civilian individuals from the state of Washington reported a circular aluminum flying object. A few more days passed before the crew of a passenger airplane recounted a rapidly approaching light in the sky over Oregon. The pilots switched on their landing lights to alert the aircraft, only to realize it was an unusual plane. Several flying discs flashed before them for about 10 minutes. Finally, a few days later, on the 8th of July, the Roswell incident occurred. Given the context, it is unsurprising that the base commander's initial reaction to the wreckage was to think of a flying saucer. By midday, a press release from Colonel Blanchard appeared in several newspapers. They also included interviews with a couple of local witnesses who described a luminous object whistling over their heads. The news of the incident became so prominent that within a few hours, the base in Roswell received calls not only from journalists across the country, but also from international publications. 3 hours later, the District Air Force commander, general by the name of Ramey, stated that in reality, debris from a regular weather balloon was found in Roswell and nothing supernatural occurred. Spoiler alert, half a century later we would learn that this was merely a cover-up, but more on that later. Already the day after the event in Roswell, newspapers in the neighboring state of Arizona published the first photos of flying saucers. 2 grainy, poor-quality images showed something resembling a flying disc. According to the photographer, William Rhodes, the object flew at an altitude of approximately 300 meters, and then vanished into the sky at high speed. By the end of 1947, there were about 800 reports of flying saucers within the United States. Surveys indicated that 90% of Americans were aware of the phenomenon of discs in the sky, and this in less than a year. Scientists, whom journalists consulted for explanations of the events, insisted that no flying saucers existed. One astronomer told Times magazine that such flying apparatuses were impossible, and the true cause of numerous incidents was a natural phenomenon and mass hypnosis. Okay, let's pause. Some of you likely have a logical question. The reason for the mass reports of saucers in 1947 is presumed clear. But were there cases before this? And indeed there were. Reports of strange lights and objects in the sky have been made for various centuries. There is a theory that the biblical story of the prophet Ezekiel and the wheels is nothing but reports of a flying saucer. Suspicious details in paintings, tales and legends. But all these are hard to take seriously due to a lack of documentary confirmed facts. Matters improved somewhat in the 19th century when reports of strange objects began to appear in newspapers. Thus, in the 1890s, there were several stories in the press from various places in the United States concerning strange objects in the sky. Various assumptions were made regarding the causes of such occurrences, from a mysterious inventor and his creations to Martians, naturally. However, no photographs, logs, or other confirmations were discovered. Hence, the journalists themselves concluded that the stories were most likely fake. Truly interesting things began to occur during the Second World War. In 1944 and 1945, mainly American pilots reported strange incidents in the sky over Europe. In most cases, pilots described glowing white spheres that appeared near the wing or behind the aircraft. These strange objects followed the pilots and sometimes performed impossible maneuvers. On Earth, pilots' accounts were mostly attributed to fatigue, exhaustion or food poisoning. However, due to the fact that such incidents were not just one or two but many more, the phenomenon was given a special name, Foo Fighters. Thus, the term Foo Fighters referred to those objects that would, in a couple of years, start being called flying saucers. In the year 1945, the first reports with pilots' accounts appeared in newspapers. Scientists, commenting on the cases, stated that it was St. Elmo's fire, an interesting atmospheric phenomenon that mainly occurs during thunderstorms. These luminous bundles often appeared on tall objects, poles, ship masts, or airplane wings. However, pilots responded to these assumptions by stating that they did not know what St. Elmo's fire looked like, and these were not it. Nevertheless, after the war ended, reports of Foo Fighters dwindled. This led to another version of the incidents. Supposedly, this was Germany's experimental weapon. However, officially all cases were written off as mass hallucinations. And this was the explanation that would have entirely satisfied the American authorities if, in the year 1947, everything that happened in the skies over the USA hadn't occurred. At first, publicly, officials seemed to ignore what had happened. However, by the end of the year, the number of cases became so large that they could no longer be ignored. The military's main concern, of course, was not extraterrestrial civilizations, but a possible superweapon of a strategic adversary, with the Soviet Union gradually becoming the primary one. In general, everything that took place in the upper echelons of power in the USA in the year 1947 is extremely telling. This helps to understand a lot about the UFO incidents over the following 70 years. Many Americans were confident that the authorities were hiding something. But the problem is that one can hide not only knowledge but ignorance as well. By the end of the year 1947, the FBI and the Air Force were investigating the incidents. Mostly their work involved interviewing and checking witnesses. Other data was, in general, almost non-existent. Of several hundred saucer incidents, only in a few were there any debris found that did not raise suspicion with investigators, and 2 grainy photos with a flying disc as well. However, the quality and the photos themselves didn't allow for anything definite to be said. In short, the authorities themselves didn't know what it was. However, authority relies on prestige. And simply coming out and saying that, yes, something is flying, but we don't know what it is not very prestigious. Another issue was the lack of understanding between agencies within the country. The FBI and the Air Force are independent of each other. This meant the FBI had to officially request the military whether the incidents were tests of secret weapons by the Americans themselves. At the end of the year 1947, there was a famous report on flying saucers by Lieutenant General Twining. The document only became famous several decades later when it was declassified. Nonetheless, in this report, Twining writes, and I quote, "The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. One hypothesis suggests that a foreign adversary, such as the USSR, made a significant technological breakthrough, and now the results of this breakthrough are flying over the territory of the USA. To investigate these incidents, a special commission composed of scientists and military personnel was created under the name Project Sign. Essentially, the task of the project participants was to determine whether the UFO was a weapon, be it American, Soviet, or someone else's, whether these could be extraterrestrial civilizations, or if it was indeed a matter of natural phenomena, human errors, and other mundane but understandable explanations. UFO incidents, of course, did not end in the year 1947. The following year, Project Sign recorded several hundred more incidents. 3 of them were the most interesting. The first occurred in January of the year 1948 in the skies over the state of Kentucky. Initially, several police officers noticed a large white round object in the sky. The same object was recorded by the military from a nearby airbase. The size of the disk was reportedly 100 meters in diameter, according to some data, while significantly more modest, according to others. An interceptor fighter was sent after the strange object, with Captain Mantell in the pilot's seat. At that moment, the unidentified object was at an altitude of approximately 5 kilometers and was ascending higher. The pilot continued to pursue it. About an hour later, Captain Mantell's crash plane was discovered by other pilots. The investigation concluded that the cause was a loss of consciousness due to oxygen deprivation. The pilot did not have an oxygen mask, and in pursuing the object, he climbed to too high an altitude. Though indirectly, pilot Mantell became the first victim of a UFO. Interestingly, before this, in none of the cases, the number of which had exceeded 1,000, did anyone report hostility from the objects. According to the official version of the investigation, what Mantell was pursuing was nothing other than the planet Venus. However, this version raised serious questions. What then did other witnesses see that day, and how could the experienced pilot Mantell have confused a UFO with Venus? The next interesting episode of the year, 1948, was the incident with an Eastern Airlines passenger plane. 2 pilots noticed a large cigar-shaped object that was flying at great speed. The object then made a sharp turn and disappeared into the sky. The incident was reported not only by the pilots but also by several witnesses on the ground. The third most interesting case of the year 1948 was the incident with a military plane over North Dakota. Pilots pursued a strange white orb that was evading them at incredible speed and performing incredible maneuvers. Later, the commission concluded that the pilots had actually seen a weather balloon or the planet Jupiter. The pilots themselves disagreed with the conclusions, and another incident that must be mentioned occurred on German territory. It is notable because the UFO was detected by radar for the first time. The hundreds of cases from the year 1948 could be divided into several categories based on the observed UFO forms. These were disks, elongated torpedoes and spheres. According to witnesses, some of them performed maneuvers that no known aircraft was capable of. For instance, they changed trajectory, descended and ascended, covering miles in mere seconds. Should a human have been inside such a flying object during these maneuvers, their skeleton would have been crushed under the overload. The conclusions of Project Sign did not greatly satisfy the military. Essentially, the commission stated that in most cases the UFOs were either natural phenomena, weather balloons, or other aircraft. Some incidents were also attributed to human error. However, in approximately 20% of cases, specialists concluded that the true cause was inexplicable. That is, there was insufficient data to categorize them and determine whether the objects posed a threat. The version suggesting superweapons of other countries was deemed unlikely by the participants of Project Sign, as that would imply an incredible level of technological advancement and an even more incredible level of secrecy to design such a thing in complete confidentiality. Interestingly, some commission members leaned towards the version that extraterrestrial civilizations might be behind some of the cases. The conclusions of Project Sign were classified for many years, and the team of specialists was disbanded. They were replaced by a new commission assembled by the US Air Force called Project Grudge. This entire story of changing commissions primarily meant one thing. The authorities did not understand what they were dealing with and certainly did not want ordinary Americans to know about it. Since the onset of most saucer-related news, senior officials from the Air Force tried either to deny or silence them. Yet due to the number of incidents, press publications grew exponentially. It should be noted, however, that most saucer-related materials were not published in reputable editions like the New York Times or the Washington Post. They appeared in magazines with names like Unknown, Popular Detective, Incredible, and other cheap infotainment media. Often, when journalists from these publications attempted to speak with incident witnesses, they were surprised to learn that representatives from official agencies had already visited the eyewitnesses. Thus, it was clear. Unofficially, the authorities were very interested in understanding what was happening in their skies. Gradually, the Air Force decided to go on a media counteroffensive. They released several articles in major outlets where journalists and experts, including Nobel laureates, debunked flying saucers. They offered understandable explanations such as Venus, meteor showers, human errors, and so on. The effect of the media campaign was the opposite. Americans became even more interested in the topic of flying objects. Due to inconsistencies in the official versions, they increasingly leaned towards alternative explanations. Among the popular conspiracy theories were aliens, Soviet superweapons, or American superweapons themselves. And here's what's interesting. What was called conspiracy theories back then, in the late 40s and early 50s, were actually fully operational hypotheses by specialists from the state secret project Grudge. Scientists seriously considered such theories. They conducted roughly the same mathematical calculations as we did at the beginning of this recording, and concluded that the likelihood of civilizations existing beyond Earth was significant. The main drawback of this theory was that for travel within the galaxy, let alone intergalactic movements, an incredible level of technological development would be required, which was difficult to imagine at the time, and generally it's still difficult to imagine even now. The approach of the Grudge Project to investigation was significantly more structured than that of their predecessors from Project Sign. Out of more than 1,000 cases, they selected only a couple hundred where there was enough data for systematic analysis, and 30 of those incidents remained marked as unexplainable. The project was led by Air Force officer Edward Ruppelt. One of the main aspects of his approach in the work was impartiality. If anyone on his team was unequivocally certain that aliens were behind a particular incident, or conversely immediately dismissed this version, they were excluded from the team. And most importantly, Edward Ruppelt decided to combat the reputation of flying saucers. It was impossible to conduct serious scientific work on a subject with such a definition. Therefore, he proposed renaming the incidents UFO, Unknown Flying Objects. Project Grudge was transformed into a new organization called Blue Book. You may have even heard this name. Among the specialists working on the UFO problem were very respectable individuals. One of the most famous was astronomer Professor Joseph Hynek. He was involved not only in space but also, for example, in developing radio-controlled projectiles for armies during the war. The work of the Blue Book project took place at a military base in the state of Ohio. They also developed the latest American missile models there and analyzed samples of captured German and Soviet weaponry. In short, this once again makes it clear that the American military approached the issue of the real reasons for unidentified flying objects with great seriousness, considering all possible versions. The main ones were 5: secret American weapons, secret weapons of a strategic adversary. At the time, it was the USSR, human error or mass hysteria, then deliberate misinformation through fakes intended to destabilize the situation in the country, and finally, alien civilizations. These 5 causes of unidentified objects in the sky, largely remain unchanged even to this day. It is clear that a large number of incidents turned out to be of human nature during investigations. We are prone to see what we want to see. If everyone around is talking about flying saucers, you also start to notice them. However, a minority of the cases were genuinely intriguing, either because they lacked an explanation or because the official version raised questions. Such was the case with the mysterious demise of Captain Mantell. Ruppelt was well acquainted with this incident and himself did not believe the official version that the experienced pilot Mantell mistook Venus for a UFO. During the investigation, it was discovered that on the particular day and hour when the crash occurred, Venus could not have been well visible, meaning Mantell clearly saw something else. Ruppelt and his team focused on testimonies from other witnesses who indicated that the object was not simply round, but rather resembled an ice cream cone in shape. During the investigation, it came to light that at the same time, an American company, on behalf of the military, was testing a new model of a weather balloon. Neither Mantell nor the other witnesses that day had encountered such configurations or were aware of their development. Thus the pilot perished while pursuing a secret military project of his own country. However, despite the relative successes of Project Blue Book, one of the main problems of all the incidents that occurred was the limitation of data. In most cases, there were neither photos nor videos nor radar indicators, and even the number of eyewitnesses was usually small. However, an incident soon occurred that would go down in history under the name of the Washington merry-go-round. The 19th of July, 1952, was an ordinary hot summer day in Washington. Around midnight, air traffic controllers of the local airport noticed numerous unidentified objects on their radars. One of the controllers said to his supervisor, "I see a fleet of flying saucers." That night, reports of unidentified screeching objects came from pilots of planes landing in Washington and other controllers. Moreover, according to radar data, the strange objects were recorded even in no-fly zones over the White House. The trajectory of the objects, according to the pilots, was peculiar. One of them described that they moved as erratically as children on a playground. Ruppelt and the Blue Book Commission began to investigate the incident. While the testimonies of pilots could still be attributed to human factors or something else, the radar readings seemed a reliable source. However, the analysis of 3 different radars that recorded the objects showed an odd result. All 3 radars simultaneously showed the objects in the same place only for a mere 30 seconds. Ruppelt and his colleagues were ready to chalk it all up to technical error, but a week later a new incident occurred. Again, in the skies over Washington, radars and military pilots spotted unidentified lights. This was indeed quite serious. The Washington merry-go-round was written about in leading publications, not just conspiracy magazines. The location of the event and the scale led to President Truman becoming concerned with the situation. He ordered an investigation. Participants in Project Blue Book worked 16-hour days. Reports, supposedly from eyewitnesses of strange phenomena, came flooding in. Ironically, some mistook the aircraft of President Truman himself for UFOs. Regardless, Ruppelt and his colleagues concluded that the cause of the Washington, D.C. UFO incident was a massive radar malfunction due to specific weather conditions. This usually occurred on a warm, humid night when columns of warm air layered above columns of cold air. The theory was confirmed several months later in another part of the United States. What the pilots reportedly saw was a regular meteor shower, according to the commission. Moreover, the witnesses themselves became confused during their testimonies, casting doubt on their statements. Despite answers being found, the Washington incident led to significant concern at the highest levels of American government. It was decided to hold the largest press conference since the end of the war to address the public's growing questions about flying saucers. Major General John Samford stated that since 1947 they had analyzed thousands of cases and managed to explain the vast majority of them. Samford also acknowledged other episodes that remained unexplained due to insufficient data to definitively categorize them, and assured that investigations would continue. In this press conference, beyond its mere existence, 2 points are particularly interesting. First, most of Samford's points were essentially repeated in the same hearings in Congress 70 years later, creating the impression that humanity hadn't progressed much in the UFO inquiry. The second notable aspect was that towards the end of the press conference, Samford stated, "We cannot say that the incidents are connected to secret projects of any US department." This turned out to be untrue. As history revealed, the cause of at least some unexplained incidents was indeed classified US military projects. Another outcome of the Washington incident was the so-called Robertson Panel, named after the commission established by the CIA to investigate UFO incidents. The Robertson Panel's conclusions had a profound influence on how US authorities approached the issue of unidentified flying objects for many decades thereafter. In short, the commission concluded everything Samford had said at the press conference, that it was neither extraterrestrials nor a foreign weapon, but entirely explainable phenomena. The problem was that the members of the Robertson Panel inclined towards the notion that the real threat of UFOs was not the UFOs themselves, but the potential panic that such reports could incite. Consequently, it was decided to promote a public agenda in the media of debunking all ongoing incidents. This was done through everything from children's cartoons to adult broadcasts. What may seem like a good idea actually had not entirely positive consequences. Firstly, the Robertson Panel was evidently eager to provide the quickest and most grounded response to all incidents, thereby calming the public. Secondly, the aggressive policy of exposing and mocking UFO cases resulted in the stigmatization of this topic. Many years later, already in the 21st century, pilots would admit that they observed strange phenomena, but remained silent for fear of being mocked or fired. The same would be stated by some reputable scientists who were generally interested in the topic of UFOs, but did not wish to express this publicly. The work of the Robertson Panel also led to a significant reduction in the Blue Book project. Essentially, it became a mere bureaucratic unit for collecting and cataloguing data. However, despite all the authorities' efforts, the topic of flying saucers was extremely popular in the 1950s. Numerous articles and books were released refuting or questioning the official standpoint on UFOs. Additionally, saucers became widespread in popular culture, from comics to TV series. It should also be remembered that the arms race, nuclear test, the Cold War, and other events were in full swing, fueling interest in various objects in the sky. For example, the famous psychologist Carl Jung posited the theory that the mass sightings of flying saucers were a natural psychological response to the fear of atomic war. And here it's probably the right moment to clarify the following. So how flying is a flying saucer? That is, can an object of such shape actually rise into the air and fly? The fact that airplanes have wings is no accident. The very design of the wing allows the machine to stay aloft. However, flying saucer-shaped vehicles invented by man have hardly been seen. This is because such experiments were conducted and they failed. In the late 1940s, a Canadian designer by the surname Frost proposed such a model to the US Air Force. They agreed to support the project. Theoretically, it made sense. An aircraft needs an airfield to take off. Airfields are potentially one of the first targets of a strategic adversary. Thus, having an aircraft that can take off and land vertically is advantageous. In the end, it took about 10 years of development to understand that the project was unviable. The saucer-shaped aircraft could barely fly, and at a very modest altitude. However, such experiments were unlikely to convince saucer enthusiasts. After all, if extraterrestrial civilizations manage to reach Earth, they are significantly more advanced than us and therefore figured out how to make saucers fly. But despite all the popularity, by the late 1950s, aliens and flying saucers had faded into the background. The cause was the achievements of humanity. Satellite launches, rockets with animals, the flight of the first human into space, the superpowers' missile race, all of this in the late 1950s and early 1960s became much more intriguing than some incomprehensible lights in the sky. Finally, humans were able to travel somewhere beyond their planet. However, this does not mean that strange UFO incidents ceased to occur. For instance, in March of the year 1966, residents of the state of Michigan reported seeing recurring lights at a low altitude. Representatives from Project Blue Book arrived on the scene and found many people in a state of panic. To calm everyone down, they quickly organized a press conference without having adequately studied the data. Professor Joseph Hynek stated at the press conference that the causes of all the phenomena in Michigan were the moon, Venus, and swamp gas. Swamp gas referred to a combination of various gases released over fields due to the decay of vegetables that could cause the air to glow. In short, the press conference was a failure, and the phrases swamp gas became a meme often referenced when it was suspected that the authorities were once again hiding something. In the 1960s, the first congressional hearings on UFO phenomena also took place. However, nothing new was said at them. Ultimately, Congress would convene on this matter again more than 50 years later. In the early 1970s, Project Blue Book was closed, and it became clear that the golden age of official UFO investigations, commissions, hearings, and everything else had come to an end. Not only the American authorities were to blame for the decline of meaningful scientific discussion regarding UFOs. Advocates of the extraterrestrial theory contributed significantly as well. Reports of saucers were not the end of it. Gradually, people began to claim they were abducted by aliens. The famous film by Steven Spielberg titled Close Encounters of the Third Kind did not receive its name by chance. The author of this concept was the already familiar astronomer Joseph Hynek. When he was first involved in investigating incidents in the 1940s, he was not engaged in studying UFOs and held a skeptical attitude towards saucers. However, over the decades, Hynek gradually shifted to the opposite side. In the 1970s, he published a book openly criticizing the Air Force, accusing them of concealing information and asserting that UFO incidents deserved serious attention. In that same book, he presented a classification of human contacts with extraterrestrial objects. Third-kind contacts referred to direct contact between witnesses and alien beings. Such stories began to appear en masse in the 1970s. Roughly, they all followed the same scenario. The best illustration of this is the story of Barney and Betty Hill. In the year 1961, they were driving home through a mountainous area in the state of New Hampshire. According to the couple's accounts, they were then abducted by aliens. Throughout the journey, they were accompanied by a bright light that kept coming closer. Eventually, Betty was able to discern rows of windows. The couple abruptly stopped the car. Barney got out and headed towards the saucer-shaped aircraft. Upon seeing humanoids inside, he ran back to the car with a scream and tried to drive away. However, a strange sound signal suddenly emanated from the car. The next thing the couple realized was that they were sitting at home. In subsequent conversations with a psychologist, they recalled how the humanoids showed them celestial maps, their ship, and spoke to them in English. In short, the story is clear. Unlike UFOs, the stories of so-called contactees are difficult to take seriously because, aside from their accounts, there is no other data, no photos, no material fragments. And the stories, in the absolute majority of cases, do not even pass the test of logic. Firstly, none of the people who met aliens ever thought to take anything from them as evidence. And secondly, the descriptions of the aliens' appearance suggest they are merely a product of their imagination. In the earliest reports of alien abductions, the victims described them exactly like humans. Moreover, people of a familiar race. They often described tall, fair-haired men, sometimes small, dark humanoid beings. Gradually, the image of aliens evolved into those very little green men who still, by and large, resemble humans. They have a head, eyes, legs, arms, fingers, in short, a body similar to ours. All this is reminiscent of the numerous stories of people who saw the face of Jesus in a cloud, or on a slice of toast, or on something else. What unites all these people? The fact that they are Christians. No Muslim has reported seeing the face of Jesus. Our imagination is not very rich and derives entirely from what we see in the real world. Let's even assume, okay, there are extraterrestrial beings who came to Earth and abducted people, then returned them. Even on our planet, most living creatures do not look like us. Worms, jellyfish, scorpions, snakes, and millions of other creatures. What are the chances that inhabitants of another planet look similar to humans? We can also include stories of mystical mass animal killings that occurred in various parts of the United States in the 70s of the last century. Farmers found their livestock killed. Moreover, the wounds were atypical for predators. Gradually, the tangle of such incidents grew larger, and many affected farmers are convinced that aliens are behind the deaths of the animals. Eventually, special experiments were even conducted and recorded on cameras. Already deceased cows were specifically left in open fields, and it turned out that predators were indeed responsible for the incidents. And the type of wounds on the cows' bodies was exactly the same as in cases allegedly involving aliens. The stories of contactees or animals killed by aliens have severely tarnished the reputation of UFOs. It seems that if you believe in the existence of UFOs, then you automatically believe in little green men, and so on. However, we now know that UFOs are something entirely different. Unidentified flying objects have been seen on all continents of the planet. Every country has its most famous stories. In France, it's the case from the year 1980 with the farmer to whose field a saucer flew. In Costa Rica, it's the case from the year 1971, which is considered the most famous UFO photograph. In Iran, it's the famous Tehran UFO incident when a pilot saw a massive white object in the sky. Many people in different countries are convinced that their authorities are hiding the real truth about the incidents, or at least part of the truth. And the example of the USA only confirms this version, as decades after the incidents, we finally learned the truth about some of them. A striking example of a mysterious incident, the truth about which we learned many years later, is the very Roswell incident. Let me remind you that the authorities initially announced that they had found the wreckage of a flying saucer and then abruptly changed the version to wreckage of a weather balloon. The cover-up succeeded to some extent, as the incident was forgotten for almost 30 years. But in the 1980s, journalists released a sensational piece. One of the participants in the events, Officer Marcel, revealed that it was not a weather balloon, but a flying saucer. The popularity of the Roswell incident skyrocketed immediately. For many conspiracy theory enthusiasts, it became a symbol of the authorities hiding the truth. Only in the mid-1990s did the US Air Force publish a report stating that the real cause of what happened in Roswell was a secret program for designing high-altitude balloons to monitor Soviet military tests. The project failed, but it was classified for a while and then simply uninterested anyone. It was only in the mid-1990s that it was linked to the Roswell incident. Did this explanation satisfy all supporters of conspiracy theories? Of course not. In 1995, the famous footage of an alien autopsy surfaced, allegedly filmed right after the crash in Roswell. For many Americans, this video became proof of the extraterrestrial nature of the incident. But the video, of course, turned out to be just a staged production made for the Fox channel. Another bright example of the truth we learned many years later became the so-called Area 51. The secret base and testing ground appeared in Nevada back in the mid-1950s, but no one knew about it then. It was an absolutely classified location. In 1959, several American astronomers were conducting space research. Their ultimate goal was to find out if there is life on other planets, and suddenly they detect a signal coming from a flying craft at twice the usual altitude of an airplane. The scientists, for a moment, thought they might have discovered a flying object from other planets. What was eventually discovered? What was a secret reconnaissance aircraft of the United States, the U-2, which could fly at tremendous altitude. This aircraft was designed precisely on the territory of Area 51, and over time, the beginning of test flights saw a dramatic increase in UFO reports in that area. And after the incident in Roswell and the U-2 case, we once again recall the quote from General Sanford's press conference. "We can say that the recent evidence is not connected with any secret development by any department of the USA." The very existence of Area 51 was only confirmed by authorities a couple of decades ago. Many believe that aliens are kept there and experiments are conducted on them. Based on history, we can quite confidently assert that the authorities are hiding something there, but it's unlikely to be aliens. More likely, it's some kind of new weaponry, but we will find out about it in 50 years, if we find out at all. And so, finally, we have arrived in the 21st century, a time when every device has a video camera. In recent decades, tons of clips have appeared featuring strange objects in the sky. However, as I said at the very beginning, full-fledged analysis requires data, and the more of it, the better. How were the videos shot? Under what circumstances? Were the objects recorded by other equipment, such as radar? How many witnesses were there? And what do they describe finally? How genuine are the videos at all? All these questions sharply narrow down the number of options. However, the most interesting cases remain. In 2017, several fragments appeared on the network that would become known as the Pentagon UFO videos. 3 clips were published in addition to an article by the New York Times dedicated to a secret Pentagon department that investigates UFO cases. The article caused a lot of noise, primarily due to the fact that serious state structures are studying UFOs and spending taxpayer money on this. However, if you delve into history, as we have already done, the information does not seem so shocking. State projects studying UFOs have existed for decades. Moreover, as it turned out from the article, not such astronomical sums were spent on this. Much more interesting is what the Commission found. And here the video recordings came to light. Interestingly, the Pentagon confirmed that the recordings are genuine and were made by military pilots in the line of duty. Therefore, they are not fake. Moreover, we know where and under what circumstances the recordings were made. You have already seen the first video, Fleur 1, at the very beginning. The second video was made in 2014 when US Air Force pilots pursued a strange object on the east coast of the country. A year later, approximately in the same area, a pilot discovered another strange object, which seemed to be rushing at incredible speed. And these are not all the videos that surfaced after the Pentagon's UFO investigation. All this led to the very first congressional hearings in 50 years. Several famous videos were unveiled at these hearings. For instance, with the flying triangle. It turned out to be merely a specific refraction of light passing through a night vision device and recorded on camera. Video from the year 2015 also received quite a rational explanation. Perhaps they were birds or clouds captured by a new and likely improperly calibrated radar and camera system. The point is that at that time, the aircraft and the aircraft carrier that captured this footage experienced a system upgrade. And in reality, the object in this video is not rushing at tremendous speed, it's merely an optical illusion. And the object in this video isn't making strange turns, the camera system is. But what is truly strange is the case from the year 2004, with which we started. We have no official answer as to what it was. Arguably the most popular American debunker of UFO incidents, Mick West, believes that the video actually captured a civilian aircraft flying through the same area at that time, and the pilot actually saw a target balloon. It's not a bad theory, especially if you want to debunk the case and provide an explanation understandable to everyone. However, the theory does not answer many questions. It's unclear what the radars initially recorded. The peculiar object was witnessed not only by Commander Fravor, but also by 3 other experienced pilots together with him. Could they all fail to distinguish a target balloon? And why did the object behave so strangely? In a word, as concluded by the Director of US Naval Intelligence, there are a number of cases that remain to be figured out. It's worth noting that congressional hearings and numerous interviews with pilots who have encountered unexplained phenomena indicate that the trend towards stigmatizing the topic of UFOs is changing. The military shares their experiences, and serious scientists theorize that some cases truly might involve alien civilizations, at least potentially. Because if we are talking about well-documented but unresolved UFO episodes, in such cases we cannot confirm that they are intelligent extraterrestrial beings. Yet at the same time, we cannot disprove that they are not extraterrestrial beings. Although, let's be honest, it would be much better for humanity if all unexplained UFO incidents found quite terrestrial explanations. Because if representatives from distant corners of our galaxy or beings from other galaxies have reached us, it means they've advanced in their development by thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And after all, we all remember what happened to the Incas and Aztecs when advanced Europeans came to them.